Hey, welcome back. All right, I don't know why I'm so nervous. I guess it's just because I'm afraid hardly anyone's gonna watch this video because it's not a nail video, and I'm sure this is gonna be a long video. So if you guys are watching, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. So a lot has been happening in the last several months, but it's been culminating for like the last year and a half. And I really thought I would just share with you what's been going on. And in doing that, I thought I would just share with you my entire journey for the last 13 years. So if you're watching, you've seen the title, that I'm going to talk about my nursing career from start to now. I'm sorry, the doggies are gonna probably be doing that for half the video. Okay, so it started 17 years ago. We were in New Jersey and I decided that I was gonna go back to school for nursing. And I decided that, together, my husband and I, we decided that I was gonna go to county college and get an associate's degree instead of going to a state college and getting a bachelor's degree, because going to state college and getting a bachelor's degree would cost like $50,000 to $70,000 in student loans. And I did not want to have, $70,000 in student loans. So I went to county college. We paid out of pocket. But county colleges do not give bachelor's degrees, they only give associate's degrees. It still took 4 years because I still had to do all of the mandatory science classes, which if you go to a state college and it's a bachelor's degree, all those science classes get lumped into the program and it ends up being a bachelor's degree. But with county college, it ends up, they're called prereqs. So you have to do all those science classes before you do the program. But it still takes 4 years. So it took 4 years. I got my associate's degree, paid out of pocket. I didn't have any debt. So we were in New Jersey. I took my NCLEX, which is the state licensing test that you have to do. You can't become a nurse unless you pass your NCLEX. So passed my NCLEX, got my license. I transferred my license to Florida because we had already purchased our house in Florida and we moved to Florida. So back then, 13 years ago, bless you, 13 years ago, they didn't actively hire graduate nurses. They're called GNs. So a brand new baby nurse that has no experience, they just graduated, they're called a GN. Back then, they didn't actively hire GNs. They only had job fairs, hiring events twice a year. So in January and in July, they would have these big hiring events and they would just hire a bunch of graduate nurses, GNs, and then they would put them on the units and then they would train them. Nowadays, hospitals constantly hire GNs. It doesn't matter what month it is. It doesn't matter whatever. If they need a nurse and a graduate nurse is the one that applies, they'll get the job. But back then, so they only had them every 6 months. So basically you could only get a job as a new nurse in January or July. So we moved to Florida in July, and by the time we moved in and got settled in, I had missed the cutoff. So I couldn't get a job. So that meant I had to wait, at least not in a hospital. So that meant I would have to wait till January to go to one of the hiring events to get hired. So in the meantime, I knew that since day one of nursing school that my dream was to do pediatrics, which is babies and children. So that was my goal. I wanted to do pediatrics. So it's July, I can't get into a hiring event, job fair. So I apply for pediatric home health. And I get the job. Home health, they hire anybody because they're desperate for nurses. So I do pediatric home health for 6 months. I'm taking care of all the little kids on ventilators, and they're all like very, very chronically ill. And then January comes around and there's a job fair. So one thing I should mention, in Florida, well, everywhere, but in Florida, there's several major, I guess I'll call them corporations or branches. I guess I'll say corporations. So there's major corporations, and then within those healthcare corporations, there's hospitals throughout the state. So one of the big corporations in Florida, and actually throughout the country, but in Florida, our big one is Advent Health, which Advent Health is throughout the country, but it's very big in Florida. And then there's several other corporations. We'll just say corporations to make things easier. So one of the corporations, Advent Health, has a job fair going on like an hour and a half away from me. But I couldn't get into anything else. So I go for this job fair an hour and a half away. I tell them I want pediatrics. With job fairs, they have you interview at a bunch of like different stations, and then they decide where they want to put you. So I told them I wanted pediatrics. I interviewed for pediatrics, and then they had an interview for, you know, other places, and they decided to put me in PCU. So really quick, let me just tell you the levels. So the highest level of care is ICU, which is intensive care. And then ICU has several subcategories, like cardiac ICU, which is the heart, neuro ICU, which is the brain, lots of different subcategories. And then below that is progressive care, PCU. So that's where the patients go that are sick. They're really sick, but they're not quite ICU level. So ICU, PCU. And then below PCU would be like medical, med-tele, med-surg. So med-surg are the patients that are having surgery. Med-tele are the patients that are basically very stable. They just need monitoring for whatever they're being treated for. It's very stable. And then below that, it would be like observation. It's where patients are just here for 24 hours. They just have something minor going on. We take care of them and we get them in and out within 24 hours. Then there are a bunch of other specialties. Not every hospital has the specialties. Some hospitals are much smaller. They don't have specialties. Not every hospital has pediatrics. This hospital happened to have pediatrics. So some specialties would be pediatrics, dialysis, which are patients that have kidney failure and they need to have dialysis, which is where they cycle, basically they're cycling their blood to clean out their blood for them. And then other specialties. So I get put into PCU. I have a GN contract. When you get trained as a GN, you have to sign a contract. Typically it's 2 years. So I have a 2-year contract that I owe this hospital for training me. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that this hospital is an hour and a half away from my house. So, and you work 13-hour shifts as a nurse. I know they say it's 12 hours, but really it's 13 hours because you have to be clocked in by 6:40 to do your huddle. And then you can't leave until at least 7:15. Plus you have to give a report on all of your patients. So it ends up being more than 13 hours. So my 13-hour shifts, plus I'm driving 3 hours a day, plus I'm having to wake up and get ready for work. So it's like 18-hour days. So I'm doing PCU. It's a little over a year later. And within my contract, after a certain amount of time, I can transfer my contract to another hospital, but it has to be within Advent Health. So when I'm ready to transfer my contract, I start looking for other hospitals. Of course, I want to do pediatrics. The first hospital that I applied to, I desperately needed to get away from this hospital. It was like I fell asleep at the wheel several times. Granted, it was only for 10 seconds and I would wake up, but I was falling asleep at the wheel. Towards the end, I was so tired that I started sleeping in my car in between my shifts. So I would just pack a duffel bag and then I would go in and use the gym to shower, and then I would just eat in the cafeteria. But it's Florida, so it was like 100 degrees outside and I'm sleeping in my car and I was having to wake up to turn the air conditioner on. And so I knew that eventually I was, not to be dramatic, but I was going to end up dead. I was either going to fall asleep at the wheel driving home, or I was going to overheat in my car and I was going to die. So it is what it is. Sorry to be dramatic, but that's how it was. So I desperately had to get away from this hospital. So the first hospital that called me back and offered me a job was a very small hospital. They didn't have pediatrics. So I got hired for PCU again. So I'm at this hospital. I'm there for maybe 3.5 years. It's a small hospital. I truly loved it in the beginning. I really loved this hospital. It was a small hospital, so our units were very tight knit. And then the hospital started to grow. They built a whole new 6-story tower. Nurses started leaving, new nurses started coming in. It wasn't quite the same. And then after around 3.5 years of being at this hospital, I decided that I want to go back to school for my bachelor's degree. But because I'm still working, and we don't want student loans, I go to a state college, but I do the program online. But because I'm still working and I'm in school, I need the flexibility. So I approached my company and I said, I want to go PRN, which is, it's called per diem, which basically means that I am able to make my own schedule. I have a set number of days that I'm required to work. So 4 shifts in 6 weeks time. I have to work at least 4 shifts in 6 weeks. But I have more flexibility. I make my own schedule. I tell them exactly which days I'm able to work. There's a few requirements. I have to work instead of most of the major holidays. I only have to pick one of them. So suddenly I'm able to have, more holidays off. I don't have to work the hurricanes anymore, which is huge in Florida. So there's a lot of pros. So they agreed, they let me go per diem. I go to school because I'm working and there's no rush to get my bachelor's degree. I take my time. What are you doing, silly girl? I take my time. So it takes me roughly 6 years to get my bachelor's degree. I'm going to school. I got my bachelor's in 2022. So I'm going to school, and then 2020 happens. We all know what happened in 2020. It was one of the hardest years of my life, emotionally and professionally. So because when you go per diem, I didn't say this, but when you go per diem, at least in my hospital, you go what's called float pool, which means I no longer belong to PCU. I belong to float pool. That means I'm not on anyone's schedule, but the day of my shift that I've told them I can work, they look at all the numbers throughout the hospital and they say, oh, this unit, whether it's med surg, PCU, whatever, this unit, they are short staffed today, so we're gonna put you here. So I'm floating to all the different units. Now I can only do what's within my scope of practice. I'm a PCU nurse, so that means I can only treat PCU or lower, which, like I told you before, PCU is the second highest level of care. So I can treat pretty much everyone except for ICU patients. However, my hospital is very small, so our ICU, we don't always fill the rooms up with ICU patients, so a lot of times they fill the beds with PCU patients. So I would frequently float to ICU and take PCU patients. So 2020, I spent the entire year in ICU taking PCU COVID patients. And because my PCU patients were a lot more stable, I had more time in the shift. I mean, granted, COVID patients are hard work even when they're PCU. But I had more time than the ICU nurses. So I spent the entire year, as soon as I was done with my patients, I was hands-on helping the ICU nurses. I was helping them prone the patients, which is when they're COVID and they're on ventilators and they're on I'm drawing a blank on what it's called. They're on basically a paralytic. I'm like, what is it called? They're on a paralytic, so their entire bodies are paralyzed so that they can recover from the COVID. They're on the ventilators because they can't breathe because everything is paralyzed, including their respirations. So when they're on that paralytic, you have to constantly turn them, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes on with these ICU COVID patients. So I'm hands-on, I'm helping them, I'm drawing labs for everyone. I'm doing everything within my scope of practice that I can legally do. And then just watching and observing everything. So I really learned that I really like that critical care aspect. So I continue with my bachelor's degree. 2022, I finished my bachelor's degree in January. And I go to my employers, I say, I just finished school. I really want to train for ICU. However, I want to stay per diem. I don't want to go back to full time. I really love having the flexibility. I want to stay per diem, and I don't want to sign any contracts. I want you to train me. Are you willing to do it? By this point, I've been at this hospital for 9 years. So the float pool manager at that time, he'd been there for a while. He knew me. He'd worked with me for years. He said, Jackie, you're one of the best nurses we have. I'm going to do whatever you want. So they trained me for ICU. I'm still float pool, so technically I'm still going to float wherever I go. So as soon as I start my training, this is important to note, management changes within the float pool. So that manager that knew me for years and that got me into the training, he left and someone new came in, and then a couple other of the lower managers within the float pool, couple of them changed as well. So I finished my training. It took me, I think they gave me like 2.5 months of training. I don't quite remember, but I finished my training and then I'm back. I was full-time doing the training, so I was always in ICU doing the training. Once I finish the training, I go back to float pool. So I'm float pool. Sometimes they float me in ICU. A lot of times they don't, because remember, my ICU is small. Even though we grew and we had the 6 towers, it's still a smaller hospital compared to other hospitals. And their ICU, they don't have a lot of critical ICU patients. So for the next 2 years, I float and I hardly ever go to ICU. Management has changed at this point, so they don't know me, they don't respect me, they don't know who I am as a person and as a nurse. And in those 2 years, a lot of things start to happen. I don't want to go into too many details, but I'll just briefly touch on some things that were starting to happen. Number one, I was never getting ICU experience. Even when they would float me to ICU, they would still give me PCU patients. It's like, if you're gonna float me there, give me PCU patients. I need to get the experience. You trained me. I need the experience before, all of that training goes out of my brain and I, So I'm not getting ICU patients. Then one thing I forgot to tell you is that when I'm float pool, so they send me to the unit that has the most needs for that day. If no unit needs me and everyone is fully staffed, then I don't work that day. So I either get put on call, which means if they need me throughout the night, then I'll come in, or I get canceled. So I'm not floating to ICU. I'm hardly getting ICU patients. I start getting canceled a lot, which during certain times of the year isn't unheard of, because we do have slow seasons, especially in Florida, with the snowbirds and stuff traveling in and out of Florida during hot and cold seasons. I start getting canceled a lot of times, because another thing I didn't mention, but this hospital is about 40 minutes away from my house. And if I don't leave at a certain time, then I get caught up in traffic, and it'll take me an hour and a half to get to work. So at this point, I've been at this hospital for 11 years. For 11 years, I've always had to leave my house at 5:15 p.m. to, number one, have the 40 minutes that takes me to get there, and also to avoid all the traffic. Otherwise, it's gonna take me an hour and a half. Everyone knows this. Everyone knows that I live and that I leave my house at 5:15. So I started getting calls at 5:50. Oh, we got to put you on call. I'm almost there. You're supposed to call me by 5 o'clock. Oh, we forgot. I'm sorry. Or I would show up and they would look at me and they say, oh, we forgot to cancel you. And so then I would have to drive back home. And by this point, it's traffic time and I'm caught up in traffic. And plus I just wasted time and gas, and they were constantly doing that. And then another thing is that because I'm float pool, I'm not allowed to physically put my own schedule into the system. So I have to email the float pool managers my schedule, and then they input my schedule for me. So a lot of times after I would give them my schedule, because we have to give our schedules 3 months in advance, and you have to give them, the 3 months worth of schedules. So I would show up and they would look at me like, you're not on the schedule. Well, I emailed you my schedule, and then they would look in the schedule, and whoever was supposed to put my schedule in never put my schedule in. So this kept happening. And then in the meantime, I had started talking to, over the last year or so, I had started talking to other GNs. Now, granted, at this point, I have 13 years of experience as a nurse. And so I started talking to other GNs, and they were making $2 less than me as a GN, and I'm a nurse with 13 years of experience, and they're making almost the same amount of money as me. So all of this is happening. I finally I'm so frustrated. I'm frustrated. So I go to the new head manager within the float pool. Granted, she's been here for 2 years now, so she's not quite new, but So I go to her with all of my grievances, and she tells me, number one, you're float pool, so you have no right to get upset for being canceled. That's part of your contract. Number two, you should not be discussing pay with anyone. Now, that's illegal. You cannot tell me that I can't discuss pay. That's a federal law. Every employee has a right to discuss pay. She didn't tell me I couldn't. She said that I shouldn't be discussing pay because it just harbors hurt feelings. The only issue that she really addressed was that absolutely they should be calling you by 5 o'clock to put you on call or cancel you, and I'll make sure that going forward that you are called by 5 o'clock. So by this point, I'm really upset, and I say to her, what is mine? Oh, and then she said, I absolutely am not getting a raise. So I said, what is my incentive this day? And she said, that's for you to decide. And she said, and if you're really unhappy, I want to say exactly how she phrased it. She said, if you're unhappy, you should pursue other options. So I go from being, Jackie, you're the best, one of the best nurses we have here, to Jackie, if you're not happy, just go somewhere else. I really don't care. So by this point, with all these things that have been happening, and then other little things within my life, nothing crazy, like I don't want you to think like, it's my family or whatever. It's nothing crazy, just lots of little things that were just culminating, and I was just getting very low. I was feeling like I had no self-worth, like my hospital doesn't care about me. I'm just a number to them. I'm slowly getting more and more depressed, although I'm saying that loosely because I've never been clinically diagnosed. I've never actually seen a therapist, but I'm just like feeling worse and worse and worse. Like 2023 was honestly the worst year of my life, both emotionally and professionally. So I feel like I have no value. And I'm crying constantly. Like all of 2023, I spent the entire year just crying. And so after she told me this, it was just like I hit rock bottom. I absolutely hit rock bottom. I felt like a failure. I honestly was going to quit nursing. I didn't even want to do this job anymore. I wanted to quit altogether. I just felt like I had no value as a person, and definitely not as a nurse. So after she tells me this, I hit rock bottom, and it's time. I need to leave. So I ended up signing up for Indeed, which is, in case you don't know, it's basically a website that you put your resume in, and it gives you access to all of the jobs that, as long as these employers put the job listing through Indeed, you have access to all of the jobs that are on the market at the moment. And then your resume is in the system, so your resume automatically, if you apply through Indeed, your resume automatically gets pushed forward. So you're not constantly having to upload your resume to all these different jobs. So I decided that it was close to the holidays. I decided that come January, I was seriously going to start looking for a job. In the meantime, when I was per diem, my minimum requirements were that I worked 4 shifts every 6 weeks, but I was always working like triple the requirement, which is allowed. I had to work at least 4. So, and every single shift is being canceled. And I never said this in the beginning, but by the way, I work night shifts. So when you work night shift, you sleep all day and then you're supposed to work all night. I was constantly being canceled, which meant, or put on call, which is worse. So I'm sleeping all day, I'm being canceled, or worse, I'm being put on call, which means I have to stay awake all night because I'm on call, and I can technically be called in at any time throughout the night. So you're sleeping all day, and then I'm not working all night because I've been canceled or I've been put on call, and that means that I spend the next day sleeping. So because I have to recover from being awake all night, even if I'm canceled, I just slept all day, so my body's awake and I can't go back to sleep again. So then the next day I end up sleeping. So I'm wasting 2 days sleeping and not working. So this, was happening constantly. So because I was constantly being canceled, with my husband, we talked about it, and I decided that, going forward until I get a new job, I'm only going to give them the minimum requirements. So I only gave them 4 shifts instead of the normal 12 shifts that I was giving them. I only gave them 4 shifts. If I'm going to be canceled, I might as well just not even schedule myself, and at least then it's an actual day off. And I'm not wasting my time, Anyways, so I decide come January after the holidays, I'm going to seriously start applying for jobs. So I'm dabbling like November, December, applying here and there, but I really start getting serious in January. So at this point, I'm looking at anything. But the thing is with hospital is there's, at the moment, like we're in a nursing crisis, we're in a nursing shortage, and yet no one's hiring because they're so used to at this point working bare bones that, hey, we've been doing it for, all these years ever since the pandemic. Let's just keep doing it. So there's really no good jobs to be had. So all the jobs that I was seeing and that I was applying for were like crappy jobs that I just didn't want. I applied at the jail. There's a lot of home health jobs, which doesn't pay money. There's a lot of agency jobs, which agency jobs are just terrible. You're basically working for the agency, and then whatever hospitals are within their scope, I guess, or whatever, they'll send you to that hospital during the day. But the thing is, they send you to the places that are so short-staffed that even though you go there, you're one more body, but they're still so short-staffed that you're going to end up having like 7-8 patients. So I did a couple on like phone interviews for 2 different agencies. On the spot, they offered me the job. I just couldn't bring myself to take these jobs. So one night, I'm looking through Indeed and I see a unicorn. So one thing to know about pediatrics is that, I don't remember if I mentioned this already. I didn't mention it. Pediatrics is a highly coveted specialty. Nurses that go into pediatrics, they love their jobs and they never leave. So nurses will retire from one hospital for like after 20 years, they'll retire. So it's very hard to even get a pediatric job. They're far and few in between. So I see this job listing for, I didn't mention this is like very important. So when I first got hired at my very first hospital as a GN, as I was getting hired, there's a new pediatric hospital being built near where I live. So number one, not all hospitals have a pediatric unit. Number two, there's not a lot of pediatric hospitals that are dedicated solely to pediatrics. So there's one hospital that's near me that's a pediatric hospital that's been around for a very long time. And then as I'm getting this first job, another pediatric hospital, brand new, is being built. And so I'm like really excited. It's this brand new pediatric hospital, but I just got hired here and I owe them my contract. So I get hired, I'm doing this job, and then remember, I still owed them my contract, so I had to go within Advent Health. So I couldn't go to this new hospital that's being hired. And at this point, I've spent the last like 9 years thinking like if I ever do get into pediatrics, well, 11 years at this point, if I ever do get into pediatrics, it's going to be at this hospital, this brand new hospital that I saw, that I just had in my mind that someday I'm going to work there. So it's like 3 a.m, I'm on Indeed, and I see that my dream hospital has a listing for PICU, which is pediatric ICU. So remember, I got that ICU training 2 years ago. I fell in love with the high acuity care, and I decided that ICU was where I wanted to end up. And then I see this PICU, pediatric ICU job at my dream hospital. And suddenly it was like, oh my God, there's an opening at my dream hospital for pediatrics. This was like it was assigned to me, like stop fiddling around with all this other crap and you're meant to go into pediatrics. So and I noticed through Indeed that they were doing what is it called? I guess kind of like a job fair. So you sign up through Indeed and you can automatically sign up for a virtual interview. So I was like, fantastic. So I sign up through Indeed, not through the hospital, through Indeed. I sign up for a virtual interview for like the following Tuesday. So I'm so excited. I start prepping. I'm practicing for interviews. One thing, a little funny story that I should note is, no, this comes later. I'll tell you that in a minute. So Tuesday comes. My interview was at 10 a.m. I'm so excited. So around 9:50, I go to log on for my interview to get my everything set up, and my link isn't working. My phone is blocking access to my camera. So I'm going through settings. I'm trying to, get access. Everything showing that I have access. My microphone is turned on. My camera is turned on. I'm rebooting my phone. Like nothing's working. I'm panicking. By this point, it's like 10:15. I'm 15 minutes late for the interview. I had no choice. I had to cancel the interview. Like I had no choice. So I go back on Indeed. I see that there's like 1 or 2 openings left, and it was only a 1-day job fair thing. So there's 1 interview left for like 4 o'clock. So I signed up for 4 o'clock and I switched to my iPad. I don't know what was going on, but I switched to my iPad. I did it right on the spot. My iPad is working. So, but by this point, my mind is spiraling because I didn't show up for the interview. So it was like a no-show, and then I canceled, and then they're going to be able to see that I signed up for a new interview. So like I'm spiraling, I'm crying, like I'm so upset at this point. But I'm able to calm myself down. I spent the rest of the day practicing. 4 o'clock comes, I'm on my iPad at this point. I do my virtual interview. I feel like it goes very well. It's only 10 or 15 minutes, but it goes pretty well. And then she tells me, oh, I can't see your resume, even though the whole point of Indeed is that it automatically gives them my resume. She's like, I can't access your resume. She's like, I'm going to, after this interview, I'm going to email you and I want you to send me your resume. So with everything that had happened, I was so like frazzled that it didn't even occur to me like, oh, if she can't see my resume, can she even see my contact information? And so sure enough, I never got an email because apparently she couldn't find my contact information. And I couldn't remember her name. I had been so, like with my nerves, with everything that had happened, I didn't remember her name. I spent 3 hours that night trying to figure out who she might have been. I had no idea if she was through the hospital or if she was just a representative through Indeed. I don't know. I couldn't find her. So I had no choice. I went to the actual hospital's website and I saw that job listing and I reapplied. I took the time I had to go through. I had to upload all the information. But now, because it's just a resume, like I'm one resume in a stack of 100. So, they're not gonna, I don't have no pediatric experience other than that 1 year of home health 13 years ago. They're not gonna call me. So I applied. This was Wednesday. I waited till Wednesday, waiting to see if maybe somehow she just hadn't emailed me right away. Wednesday, she hadn't emailed me. So I applied on Wednesday. So the little funny side story that I was going to tell you. Ever since I went float pool 8 or 9 years ago, whatever it was, 8 years ago, periodically I would have dreams about work. I know it sucks dreaming about work. I would dream that I was canceled or I was put on call. Or if I didn't dream it, as I was waking up, I would just have this strong feeling that, oh, you're going to get canceled today. And every time I had that dream or that strong feeling, I was canceled or I was put on call. And so it became like a running joke. Like I put it into the universe. And my husband was getting pissed at me. He's like, stop dreaming about it. Like you're making it come true. And I would always talk to Barb and Krista, my 2 besties. And I would always tell them, oh, I'm getting canceled tonight. And then, so sure enough, I would get canceled. So I applied on Wednesday. That Friday, as I was waking up, I just had this like strong feeling that I'm going to find out on my birthday, which was Monday, that you got the job, which doesn't make sense because I haven't even really interviewed. That Indeed interview didn't count. So I'm like, I just, let it go. Like that's just my heart saying, being excited. And I dreamt, or I felt that I was going to find out on my birthday. So Monday is my birthday. I have an amazing day. I decided to go to our clubhouse and use the hot tub. And so I come back to my car and I had a voicemail from the hospital saying they chose my application and they wanted me to come in and interview. So I called them back and they're interviewing over the next 2 weeks. Another thing. So when I was doing the interview on Indeed, I found out that because I had asked her about like how many positions were available, and she said there's like 10, which is unheard of. She said, but they had like half their staff retired. So she called me back. She has interviews going on for the next 2 weeks, like 100 interviews. 2 weeks would be like a Wednesday, and I was going to be in Idaho. I go visit Krista every year, and so I told her, I'm sorry, but I'm going to be out of state that day. She was really impressed with my interview with the 13 years of experience, and she said, I'm going to squeeze you in this Friday. Can you come in? I said, absolutely. So I go in for my interview on Friday. Another thing I forgot to mention is that every day for 11 years when I was going to my hospital, I would pass this hospital, my dream hospital. I would pass them. I would see them, over the hill, at one of the exits. And so the day of the interview, I'm getting off on the exit. I see the hospital. I get like this, overwhelming, just giddiness. I'm laughing. I have goosebumps. Everything just feels right. So I go in, and the manager had told me to get there 15 minutes early because she said the garage is crazy. So I go into the garage, and the very first spot is available. So I go in, I do my interview. I feel like the interview went amazing. They asked me a question, describe a situation where I use critical thinking to help my patient. Because remember, this is ICU, an ICU position, it's PICU, so you need to have critical thinking. So I tell them my story that I had, practiced, and they really liked my story. They asked me 3 or 4 other questions based off of that story. They wanted me to elaborate on certain details. And then she told me that that was a perfect example of what they were looking for. So the interview goes amazing. They asked me if I wanted to shadow a nurse for half an hour. They specifically chose this one nurse because they had just hired her 4 months ago, and she also was from Advent Health. By the way, this isn't Advent Health. This is another one of the corporations. She had also come from Advent Health. She'd been a nurse for 5 years. I've been a nurse for 13. She'd been a nurse for 5 years. She also had no pediatric experience, and they had just hired her 4 months ago. So they wanted me to shadow with her. So I'm shadowing with her. I'm asking her all my questions, asking about the culture on the unit. And then she's showing me her patients, and one of the little babies wraps her hand around my finger. And it just felt right. Everything felt right. So the manager tells me, I know I'm getting teary-eyed, so the manager tells me, you're not going to hear anything for at least 2 weeks, because remember, we still have interviews going on for 2 weeks. So I'm not exaggerating. For the next 2 weeks, I felt peaceful. I felt calm. I wasn't anxious. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't constantly thinking about, oh, did I get the job? I just felt in my heart that I had the job. But, and I told this to a couple of my friends, I even told them, I said, even if I don't get this job, at this hospital, I now know that switching to pediatrics is right for me. This is what I meant to do. Sorry. So I'm in Idaho. I'm with Krista. It's the Wednesday, the last day that she's supposed to be having interviews. By that Friday, I hadn't heard anything. But remember, they're filling 10 spots. They're filling 10 positions. So I don't worry too much. The following Wednesday, I'm leaving Idaho. I'm going home. By that Wednesday, I hadn't heard anything. And I knew in my gut that I didn't get the job. So I waited until the following Monday. I emailed, and she tells me that they were very impressed with my interview, but the fact of the matter is that they just had to go with nurses that had pediatric experience. So I was devastated. I was crying. I was so upset. In hindsight, because now it's been a month and a half, I can look at it now and I can understand. They lost half of their staffing to retirement. So of course they're going to want nurses that had pediatric experience. I honestly believe that if they'd only had maybe 1 or 2 positions that they were filling, I honestly believe that I would have gotten the job. But because they were down to bare bones staffing, they really needed to have experienced pediatric nurses. So in hindsight now, I can understand that. But at the time, I was just devastated. This was my dream hospital, my dream position of PICU. So I'm back to square one. So remember, I work for Advent Health. So I go onto our job board, and I see that Advent Health Orlando, which is the huge hospital in Orlando, they're not a pediatric hospital. They're just a huge hospital that has multiple different towers, and they're one of the #1 trauma hospitals. And they have a couple different pediatric units. They have like med-surg, medical. Remember I told you earlier, like med-surg is like the lowest, or medical is like the lowest level of care. And then they have their PICU, which is pediatric ICU. So I see that they have a pediatric ICU spot available. So I'm like, okay, great. I've been at this company for 13 years. I'm gonna put in an application. If I get hired, technically it's a transfer. And I kind of am hoping that because I've been with the system for 13 years that they're gonna see my application and they're gonna offer me an interview. So I apply, and within like a day, I was rejected. They don't even want an interview. So, and remember I said that there's not a lot of pediatric opportunities because not a lot of hospitals even have pediatrics. So by this point, I realized that I'm not gonna get a PICU job. No one's gonna hire me to start off in the ICU with no pediatric experience. Yes, I have a couple years that I can put on my resume of ICU experience, but it's not pediatrics. So I see that Orlando has a medical position available in pediatrics. So I apply for the pediatric medical position. Then in the meantime, I'm back on Indeed and I don't hear anything right away. So that's a good sign they haven't rejected me right away. So in the meantime, I go back on Indeed. I see a position for, remember I told you that there's two pediatric hospitals. This one that the new one, they're not new now, they've been around for like 12 years, but the new one, and then there's that established pediatric hospital. And I see that they have not a PICU position, but basically like a PCU, pediatric position. Remember I told you PCU is like right under ICU. So I ditch Indeed altogether. I go to their website and I apply for it's called Accelerated Pediatrics, is their version of like PCU basically. So I apply for that. In the meantime, I start doing research, and I guess because I had blinders for this hospital, I'm trying to like do this in frame, like my dream hospital, I never really gave much thought to this other hospital, this established hospital. So in doing my research, I learned that this other hospital is actually the #1 rated pediatric hospital in the state, not just in the Orlando area, but in the entire state. They are a trauma hospital. They actually are two hospitals side by side. So there's the mother-baby unit, so labor and delivery, and then the NICU, which is where newborn babies, as soon as they're born, if they have to go to ICU, they go to the NICU. That's one hospital. And then directly next to them is an entire pediatric hospital with so many different specialties, oncology, like all these different pediatric specialties. And then they're connected with a walking tunnel that you can walk from one to the other. So I put in my application. I learned that they're like the #1 hospital in the state. And they emailed me back within like 2 days. They said, next Monday, we're having a job fair. Apparently they're hiring for all the positions, not except for PICU, but they're hiring for all the positions. They needed nurses, so they decided to hold a job fair. So they invited me to the job fair. So I signed up for the very first slot of the job fair. It's a Monday. I have to work Monday night. I'm working night shift Monday night. So I go to this job fair. My heart is still set on PICU. If I have to start on the bottom, which by this point I've decided that I'm going to have to start on the bottom, but my heart is set on that I'm going to eventually make it into the PICU. So I go to the job fair. I give them my resume. In case you don't know how job fairs work, there's booths or like little tables, and then there's representatives from every unit, and then you can go to whatever booth or table you want to apply for. And then typically with job fairs, they will hire like immediately from within, the candidates that are applying through the job fair. So I give them my resume. I say, I know you don't have any PICU spots available, but that's my dream. That's my goal, is PICU. So she says, let me go. PICU wasn't being represented during the job fair. So she said, let me go find a couple ladies and, I'll come back to you. So a couple other ladies, they go and they do their interviews for whatever they're applying for. And then she comes back to me. She says, come on in. So I go into the job fair. I interview with these two ladies. And I tell them I'm interested in the PICU. And they said, well, it just so happens that we just opened up a PICU position like 2 days ago. We posted online, which I hadn't seen because, I hadn't seen it because it wasn't there when I was looking. So I do my preliminary interview with them. They said, we want to move you forward. Would you like to go upstairs and directly interview for PICU? Now remember, PICU isn't really being represented during the job fair, so the manager or whoever isn't here. So it's kind of like an on the spot, let's take you up to PICU. Do you want to interview for the position that we just opened up? There's only one spot available. I said, absolutely. So I go upstairs, I interview for the PICU. The 2 ladies joined, so it's the 3 of us. I'm with the manager, I'm with these 2 ladies. I'm interviewing. One thing to note is that Joint Commission was there that day. Just briefly, Joint Commission is basically, it's like, if you think about for a restaurant, the health inspector, it's basically a health inspector, but for hospitals. So Joint Commission can absolutely shut down a hospital. They can shut down a unit if it's not within code or, safety violations, whatever, cleanliness. There's a lot that goes into it. So Joint Commission is there that day, which is chaotic. You never know exactly when they're coming. So I'm like spur of the moment interviewing with the manager while Joint Commission is there. She's interviewing me, but she's constantly looking at her watch. At one point she leaves for like 3 minutes and comes back. That's not a bad thing. I understand this is Joint Commission. However, it just meant that I couldn't get a feel for how the interview was going. I couldn't get a read on her if she liked my interview or not. So I do the interview. The one lady, she shows me around the whole unit. And then she asked me, do you want to go back downstairs to the job fair and interview at any other tables? By this point, it's like 11:30. I have to work tonight. I've been up since 6 a.m. And there was already, everyone was already there for their time slots. And I said, no, I'm okay. I said, I interviewed for where I wanted to interview, which is the PICU. So they tell me that I should hear within a week, Monday. They said they only had 2 other people that applied for the PICU that they were wanting to interview. So 3 people for 1 spot. So I leave. I spend the next week just not trusting myself, everything that had happened with my dream hospital, and I thought I got the job. So I'm not trusting myself. I really just don't know how it went. And another thing that I should mention is that remember, I applied at Orlando for the medical, and then I applied here. These are my last 2 opportunities. There's nothing else as far as pediatrics in my area. If I don't get one of these 2 jobs, I'm not getting into pediatrics at all. So the week goes by, and this is something that I didn't tell anyone. I didn't even tell Krista and Barb, but I had 2 dreams that I got this job. Not just like I woke up and I had a feeling. I had 2 dreams that I got this job at this #1 hospital. But by this point, I'm just laughing because, I dreamt about the other place and, and I didn't get the job. So a week goes by, it's Monday, I have to work night shift again. I don't hear from them. So I'm like, okay, I probably didn't get the job. So I go to work. I'm coming home Tuesday morning. I'm driving home. I get a call, and it's from Orlando. Remember the medical position. And they want to interview me. So by this point, I've resigned myself to the fact that I'm just gonna have to start at the bottom. I'm gonna have to get 2 years of experience, and then I'm gonna have to re-look and see if anyone else is hiring for PICU in 2 years. So I set up for an interview. I message my husband. I tell him, I'm gonna have to start from the bottom. I said, Orlando wants to interview me. This other hospital isn't interested, so I'm gonna have to interview. Hopefully I can get that job. I kid you not, you guys. 2 minutes later, the hospital calls me. They said I was their #1 candidate, and they offered me a job for the PICU. They sent me my offer letter. I signed it immediately. I resigned that day from my current hospital. I gave them 3 weeks. I resigned. I'm still like, I'm so overwhelmed, you guys. So the fact that I got into PICU with no pediatric experience, and the fact that I got into the #1 hospital in the state is just like, I can't believe it, you guys. So I'm happy. These are happy tears. Like, I promise after this, I'm not gonna be crying anymore. I'm so happy. So I start in 3 weeks. My dream is finally coming true. You know, everyone, my friends kept telling me when I didn't get my dream hospital that, and my sister, you know, was telling me that there's something better waiting for you. And I just didn't believe it. And so now what I thought was my dream is not what my dream actually was meant to be. My dream is working at this hospital, this #1 hospital in the state for PICU. And I just feel so blessed, you guys. Like, this has been a long journey, 13 years, a lot of trials and tribulations, and this is just where I'm meant to be. I feel it in my soul that this is where I'm supposed to be, and I'm so happy. So now I'm going to spend the next 3 weeks. I have to study, because remember, I've spent 13 years with adults. Children, they have like all of their vital signs. Everything that's normal or abnormal is completely different from adults. And also with children, you can't just say from birth to 18, this is what is a normal value. Every category, like newborns, these are what's normal. 1 to 2, this is what's normal. 3 to 4, like this is what's normal. So I have a lot of studying to do. I think they're going to give me around 8 weeks of training. So I want to go in knowing as much as I can so that I can really just spend those 8 weeks kind of, you know, just really focusing on learning and not having to feel, you know, like, oh, like I don't know what I'm doing, you know. So I bought a whole pediatric book. I bought that when I had applied for my dream hospitals, but I just hadn't opened it yet. But I bought a whole pediatric books. I bought a whole thing, like cheat sheets of like, so I could start learning what's normal and what's not. And I'm just so excited for this new chapter in my life. I feel like I can finally start feeling like myself again, start being happy again, and I'm really happy and blessed. So that's what's been going on for the last few months. And I'm just really excited about this new chapter in my life. If you guys have watched this whole video, thank you so much. If you have any comments you want to leave them down below. And I'm just really happy, and that's all I wanted to say. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you later. Bye.